Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Liberty GB radio show. I'm your host for tonight, Tim Burton, and tonight we have panelists Paul Weston and Enza Ferreri from Liberty GB. Dr. Bill Warner, who is our guest tonight, holds a PhD in physics and mathematics from North Carolina State University. He's been a university professor, a businessman, and applied physicist, but he's probably best known to our listeners for the work that he's done in introducing Islam to a wider audience. He postulates that there are three independent views of Islam that are not reconcilable. The three views are believer-centric, apologist-centric, and kafir-centric. The believer-centric view is the view of a Muslim. Apologist-centric is based on the apologetic view of non-Muslims, and kafir-centric is the view of the non-Muslim. A comprehensive knowledge of Islam must include all three. The views cannot be resolved, but each must stand alone. And a lot of what Dr. Warner has written in his essays and in his articles on his website, the politicalislam.com website, and the YouTube videos, which I'm sure many of our listeners will have seen, will of course reflect these views. So, Dr. Warner, I'll bring you into the studio. You are now live on Liberty GB Radio. Good evening to you, Bill.
Hello, Tim. How are you doing?
I was doing absolutely fine until I dropped my notes in a big heap on the floor just as the show was starting. Thank you for asking. Bill, thank you ever so much for joining us on the show this evening. We have, of course, a situation at the moment in the Middle East and the Far East with the persecution of Christians. And I understand that you're particularly interested in that. And if you'd like to give us a little bit of background for our listeners on this, and you've got a particular project which you'd like to talk about, which is the Voice for the Voiceless. So if I allow you to expand on that in your own words.
Okay. First off, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is called the Buckle on the Bible Belt. And the reason for that is we had some people come from England, and they wanted to do a show on religiosity in Nashville, and they were stunned at how many churches there were. They said it's like there's one on every corner. So I come from a town which prides itself on its religiosity. The decided moral contrast to see how many churches there are and to see how little caring there is for the fact that their brothers and sisters are being murdered on a weekly basis, usually overseas. And so this is a distinct contrast, if you will, and one that is distressing to me. And I have talked about the death of Christians forever and ever. I've talked about it from a historical sense, a doctrinal sense, because what we see in history is that the murder of Christians, as we're finding, I don't know, the figure that sticks in my mind was, I think last week, 62 Nigerian Christians were killed simply because they were Christian. Well, I know that fact, but you will not find that fact being talked about in almost any church in Nashville. So the real estate religiosity is predominant, but the caring religiosity for their brothers and sisters is almost absent. So I live in sort of a high contrast area, if you will. And it has become clear to me more and more. First off, I'm monomaniacal. I'm 73 years old, and so I don't have enough time to do a lot of things, and I only do one thing, and that is deal with Islam. And I've dealt with Islam, as you pointed out, by writing books. I've published 3 different Qurans. I publish on the Hadith. I write newsletters on the nature of Islam and why it does what it does, because killing Christians, we have to understand that Muhammad, the perfect Muslim, was a Christian killer, a Jew killer, and a pagan killer. So it all fits together. Theory, doctrine, and application or history all fit together. And that's what I've emphasized all this time. That is, I have spoken about Islam. And what I get here in America is I've been called everything but kind, okay? And it gradually began to sink into me that the approach through knowledge and facts, and I'm a scientist, okay, so I'm rather fond of facts. I own lots and lots of books. I read all the time. But I find that the fact-based approach, which in my personal bias I thought was an overwhelming approach, turns out to be not very effective. We find that religious leaders, whether they're Jewish or Christian, just simply ignore the facts of the matter. I mean, they really just ignore it. And furthermore, they won't give you any space to talk about it. So when they have religious dialogues, for instance, Family of Abraham dialogues, they never invite the injured members of the family. That is, persecuted Christians are never invited to these dialogues. So I fell to thinking, as I've told you, this is monomaniacal, and I suddenly realized that we needed to open up another front in dealing with Islam, and I'm going to call it, for purposes of this talk, the victim front. We need to start talking about the victims, and we need to start talking about the morality of our leaders in the fact that they won't discuss the victims. We in Tennessee here in Nashville, we have ministers who will go to a Family of Abraham event. There'll be 200 or 300 there, and they're just so sympathetic because a Muslim talks about the fact that at Target somebody pointed at her hijab. And it's true, America is just the most racist, dreadful, bigoted place in the world, and we're so sorry that you Muslims have to come here and put up with evil like Bill Warner. So, and I noticed something else. When they want to attack me, I never get my facts attacked. That is, they never say, Bill, that's not the proper application of that hadith, or Bill, that sirah doesn't apply. No, what they say, I've already told you. They call me bad moral names. I'm a bigot. So it seems to me that we need to open up a front on feelings and morality and victims and take an entire new approach. And so I've prepared a campaign which I'm rolling out slowly, which I call A Voice for the Voiceless. Because the sin and moral crime that I accuse the religious leaders here in Tennessee of being is that they are silent in the face of evil. They will not speak against evil. They accommodate evil. And they will not even give their dead brothers and sisters a tip of the hat. So I want to try use of shame. And so that gives you a background of I'm trying to open up a moral victim front, and its goal is not to attack the Muslims. I don't even want to discuss them anymore. What I want to discuss is our own religious leaders who seem to only be concerned about nickels and noses.
Yeah. I was going to say nickels and noses is a phrase that I've heard used before, and I think it's really very appropriate in this sort of context. Before you elaborate a little further, Bill, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask our guests in turn to briefly ask you a question about what you've said up to now. May I do that? I'd like to ask
Surely.
Paul first of all. Paul, would you like to go ahead?
And by the way, let me see, Paul, I'm a big fan of yours.
Well, the feeling is absolutely mutual, Bill. Thanks a lot for coming on here tonight. Now, listen, I don't really have a question for Bill particularly because, well, I do, but I'll come to that later. But I just want to state my complete agreement with what you've just been saying, which is we should not be attacking Muslims and we should not be attacking Islam. We can point out the problems within a religion that sort of overlaps with a political ideology, but the actual attacking, I think we should reserve for in your case the American, and in our case the British politicians and the churchmen and the leaders and the educationers. All of these people who are bending over backwards to either appease Islam because they're frightened of them, or because they view them as useful pawns in their ongoing revolutionary battle against Western civilization. And I think these are the people, as you quite rightly say, we should be attacking all the time without fail. And that really is the only point I would like to make at the moment. I'm much more interested in listening to Bill than myself tonight, so I will hand myself back over again.
Okay. Bill, can I introduce Enza Ferreri to you? and give Enza an opportunity to say hello and ask an initial question of her own. Enza, go ahead.
I just wanted to tell you, Tim, that the university I took a degree in philosophy from is not pizza, it's Pisa. Oh. Because it sounded a little bit funny the way you said it.
I do apologise, Enza. My Italian is not that good.
A funny remark. Now, there is one fundamental question I'd like to ask, but I don't know if it's the case of asking it now or at the end of the program. But anyway, to me, the most important thing is, because I know a lot about the persecution of Christians in the world, and what is the stumbling block is what can we do practically for them. I think it's extremely difficult. I mean, what you're doing, Bill, is very good because it's something practical, because so far we've mainly written about it. Raymond Ibrahim has written that important book, Crucified Again, to which I contributed a bit about Europe. And there is, of course, there is persecution of Christians in the West as well, although albeit in a much less degree. For instance, apostates from Islam, the Muslim immigrants in the West who convert to Christianity are also risk of their lives. So, with the spread of Islam, the spread of persecution of Christians has also increased, and we know it's increasing all the time. I mean, the difference. For instance, Le Figaro, the French newspaper Le Figaro, on Christmas Day, it always publishes a map of the persecution of Christians in the world. And it this year, in 2003, last year, it compared it to the 2010 one. And there was, the areas in red, which are the worst, or even in yellow, have become bigger and bigger. So we know that not only there is a huge Christian persecution in the world, but it's also increasing all the time. And I suppose that what to do will be the most difficult question. So at the moment, I'm just saying that, Bill, you've started something concrete and practical, and it seems a very good thing to do.
What I want to do, I cannot help Nigerian Christians. What I can do is to bring their case, if you will, their moral case to Christian leaders here in Nashville. And what I want to do is, I think somewhat in military terms. And so I think in terms of, for instance, tactical raids, all right? I've tried writing letters and that kind of thing, and I now want to try another kind of, I'm going to use the term war, which is in my opinion, almost a neutral word. I want to try a different kind of war. Instead of writing articles and doing video blogs and that kind of thing, all of those things that I've done up to this point have one thing in common. I am not in the same room with both my allies or my enemies. Now, by the way, when I say enemies here, some people say, well, that's slightly strong in language, but I think that it is a war, and that one of the first things you need to do is to understand your enemy. And we have, if you will, two enemies. The far enemy is Islam, and the near enemy are what I call the apologist. That's a term I use, and when used without any other adjectives, I'm talking about people who are apologists for Islam. So what I want to do is I want to go to the watering holes of the apologist. And the watering holes for the apologist, by the way, if you're a predator hunter, what you want to do is find where your game comes for water and just wait. You'll get your chance. And in Nashville, we have plenty of watering holes. They're Family of Abraham meetings. There's 2 next week. There are apologists who come to the universities. So what I want to do is to develop a program. Now, by the way, these are all plans, but they are, as we speak, beginning to be put in place. I've only had this idea recently. So what we want to do is to do something like go to a Family of Abraham event. not for the purpose. We used to go to these events and thought we would ask a really intelligent question that would show the deceit and the lies in the speaker. Well, it turns out as soon as they determined that we were going to ask hard questions, they don't let you ask questions anymore. You have to write your questions down on a piece of paper, and if they choose to do so, they will ask the question. So what I want to do is to develop also something that's very simple. If we're going to do this, it has to be simple, because not many people are going to sit down and exercise sheer scholarship to master the Hadith. So we need something that's simple to do. So what I want to do is to this. I've got a brochure copy which develops the idea of a moral crime, and I've adopted also an entirely leftist language. For instance, instead of talking so much about suffering Christians, I call it the greatest human rights crime in the world. So there we're adopting already a sort of United Nations kind of speech. And what I refer to instead of Christians so much is religious minorities. Okay? Because here's the deal. All of the apologists read and speak progressive leftist language. That's the way they think. So I want to adopt a language in my brochures which will seem natural to them. The other thing I want to do is to point out to them in this brochure that as moral leaders, they are silent in the face of evil. Now, I'm very clear that what is being done in the persecution of religious minorities, these are victims. And victims, of course, really trip the progressive trigger. That is a language they naturally understand. When they come together for these religious dialogues, they are all about victims, except the Muslims are the poor victims. I mean, that they're having to exist in such a cruel, racist, Islamophobic, bigot world as America. So we want to give them bigger victims, if you will. If they want victims, we'll give it to them. But I make no mention of Islam at all, jihad, or Muslims, but instead the attack point, if you will, is the moral leadership, the silence of the religious community. And, of course, we quote Bonhoeffer, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. And what we do is we adopt a tone of begging these leaders to take care of the voiceless, that they should speak for the voiceless, because these voiceless never have they don't get to come to their meetings. So that's the thrust. But now how to get them to read the brochure, and then I'll get to this point, then I'll be quiet. We want to go to their meetings, and 3 or 4 minutes before the meeting starts, I want to have one of us for about every 10 of them, so we need 20 or 30 people. We come into the room, we sit at the end of rows. At a predetermined time, the floor captain says, this is a protest demonstration. Stands up and puts over their face a strip of cloth that has voiceless written on it, so it looks like a gag. At the same time, everyone else stands up in the room, puts on their voiceless gag, and proceeds in a very methodical way they'll have been trained to do, packets of these brochures at the end of every row, and then we walk out of the room because we are voiceless. The purpose of this drama, if you will, is to force, and everyone who gets a brochure will read it under these circumstances because they've never seen anything like this. It is, if you will, socially shocking. So what I want to do is to put together a cadre. You'll notice a military term. A cadre, and I can do this, of people in Nashville where everywhere that Muslims show up to speak, whether it's at a university or anywhere else, that we hand out pretty much the same brochures, so that the Muslims finally get to know that in Nashville, Tennessee, if you're going to show up, these people are going to call out they want a voice for the voiceless. So that is 1/3 of my plan.
That's really interesting, Bill. It's something that sounds like it might work over here as well, not just in the United States. And what I'd like to do is to get comments from each of our panelists in turn, and I'll start with Paul and then move on to Enza. Paul, can I have your comments on what Bill has said so far, please?
I love it. I love all the stuff Bill comes out with. You know, this whole idea of turning it round on them is just music to my ears. And this whole stuff about the Muslims being the victims. Of course, Muslims are always the victims in Western societies because they're a minority. And in the leftist, the liberal left worldview, all minorities are oppressed. Now, this is economic Marxism from the communist days, rewritten as cultural Marxism today, which is designed to do away with the foundations that built modern Western Christian liberal democracies. So every single person has to be utilized to batter them down, whether it's Muslim minorities or female minorities or homosexual minorities. It's always a group that has to be set against us. And because we're this horrible oppressive majority, the idea, Bill's idea, that you turn this around and you make us into the victims and you implore people to, in the language they understand, the progressive liberal speak they understand, I think is absolutely brilliant. And the only question I have for Bill after that is, are you doing this in proper Christian churches? You have to do this in Nashville, because I've been to Nashville. As you know, I met Bill in Nashville a couple of years ago, and I was absolutely staggered as to the religion and the patriotism that I encountered there compared to poor old Britain, where a lot of that has just disappeared now. So my question to Bill would very quickly be: these are traditional churches that you're going to have to do this in?
I want to do it in every venue where Muslims show up. Okay, I want the brochure brigade, which is what I call it. Again, the military analogy, because to me this is war. By the way, this is not a competition. This is war, which I think is something that some people are a little bit afraid to talk about. Whoa. So anyway, I want to show up with these brochures every time Muslims show up in a public event. So if it's at a church, yes, it's at a church. If it's at a university or wherever they meet, I want to establish in the Muslim mind by the end of year 2014 that those people are going to show up and that they just know to expect it. I mean, it will be a delight to me when they try to keep us out of a public event. In America, that presents a slight problem. If you advertise it in the public, then you have to let the public come in. So I want to crank up the moral pressure on what should be our moral leaders, in particular religious leaders. This is an opinion, but I think that in America we find that we have moral rot in all of our areas, which you've mentioned, the educators, the pulpits. In America, even the military is rotting at the top. So I want to, every case we can, put the moral pressure on. I want to become a known irritant. If there is suffering, I just want to push suffering in their face until finally they have to ask the moral question, what is the cause of this suffering? But I'll let them ask their own moral question. But I do want to be very clear that they are immoral and that they are evil. And these are the kind of words I want to be using. I want to use moral terms. I want to shame them. Will you not reach out and touch your brothers and sisters? Will you not stand up for them? I said on a radio show I said, I can construct both a moral argument and a scriptural argument for Christians caring for their brothers and sisters. And the guy who was the show I was on is a Christian minister. I said, is that the case? He said, oh, very definitely. I said, now then, I ask you this question. What moral argument or religious or scriptural argument can you give for refusing to embrace your bloodied brothers and sisters? Can you construct such an argument? And he said, well, no, I can't really. So this is the kind of work I want to do. Instead of arguing whether there is a sunnah or not, I just want to present all moral arguments. You know, we're talking about dead people here, not hijabs being stared at in the Target store.
I think that's I'm just going to basically sit here and agree with everything Bill Warner says tonight. But when you argue with the left, take for example a situation that you live in a small town. not Nashville, but a small town in Britain, and you have out of say 5,000 people, you have a Muslim family, one Muslim family. Now, if you started suggesting that this is absolutely wrong and dreadful and this Muslim family should be thrown out and they're corrupting our culture and our country, you can expect to be attacked by the left as a bigoted racist. But when you get to the point that now 25% of the town is Muslim, that 25% of the town is effectively a no-go area. There are all sorts of horrific incidents being carried out in that section of the town. You can then turn the argument onto the left and say, look, in the future, these people, based on their demographics, are going to be a majority. Now, you tell me why you think it is moral, ethical, and just that we should stand aside as an advanced liberal democracy to be replaced by these people who are absolutely appalling in their attitude towards non-Muslims, in their attitude towards homosexuals and Jews, and of course women. Explain to me why I am morally wrong when I think you're morally wrong. And that, of course, is the time that you can get them. You can always get them on the moral and ethical argument now, because the numbers are so great that it is no longer a question of singling out one family. It is now a question of looking at this tsunami, this demographic tsunami heading our way, with all of the attendant unpleasantness that goes with it. So getting them on the moral and ethical angle is absolutely right. And yet again, I'm simply basically parroting Bill, but it is. It's just everybody needs to learn from this. When you argue with the left, or not even the hard left, but the liberals as well, this is how this is how you have to do it.
I would certainly agree with Paul there, and I was just thinking if we could have this narrative accepted everywhere, not just in the West, because it's everywhere that Muslims persecute non-Muslims everywhere in the world. I was just thinking of the example of the Buddhists in Burma, where the Rohingya Muslims have made life so miserable for the Buddhists that Buddhist monks are now arming themselves and fighting back. And of course the Rohingya Muslims are crying foul, because you've really got to upset a Buddhist for him to go and pick up a gun and to start acting in that manner. But when it's a question of survival, of course, you have to understand it. You do. I mean, it's understandable is what I meant. Sorry, but yeah, of course, the Rohingya Muslims are now calling on all their leftist allies everywhere around the world to say, "Oh, please help us. We're a poor, persecuted minority, and these nasty Buddhists are attacking us." But if we could get this narrative that you're proposing, a voice for the voiceless, to be accepted as a norm, then I think people would start seeing that they have been duped by the Muslim narrative up to now, and I think that would really make a huge difference.
If I understood well, I think that Bill was saying that we should say that these people are immoral, but I don't know if he was referring to the Western leaders, religious and political leaders, who don't.
That is exactly who is referring to.
But not the Muslims who commit these atrocities. Is that what you were saying, Bill?
Yes, I only want to engage our leadership, whether they're religious, media, military, police. I just want to engage our leadership. Because here's the thing. When we engage our own, there is even the most hard-dyed leftist, in some part of him, has some respect for the golden rule and has some respect for logical thought. He may try to avoid it as much as possible, but if you can point out contradictions, you can actually make some gains. What I'm saying is that I want to only present arguments to members of my civilization. My civilization is based upon the moral keystone of the golden rule and the logical keystone of rational thought. So those are the people I want to engage. And besides that, I also, from a military standpoint, want to engage them, because if we can remove the moral support of these people, then Islam will fail. Because when we look carefully and see what happens, it is the apologists who always carry out the devastating work that Islam produces in a society. Because it is, say, a Methodist who brings in the idea that whatever we have to do to help these poor Muslim people. It is the apologists who are advancing Islam. If we can retard the apologist, Islam starts to fail. That is, I want to have flanking attacks on Islam. A brilliant example of this is in Israel, how the Muslims are slowly attacking Israel, not so much with direct attacks, but by taking away all of her allies. So I want to attack Islam's allies in America, and I want to use a moral argument to do it, and I want it to be in the same room. We have succeeded on the Internet and in the realm of ideas. It is time for us to get out of that and to be in the same room with the apologists who are advancing Islam. I have a 3-point front in A Voice for the Voiceless. I've told you about one of them, which I sort of call the Brochure Brigade. Okay? I have 2 more stages to it. I am a child of the 60s. As a matter of fact, I could be described as a hippie apostate. Okay? I tell my audience sometimes, my audiences in America are almost always some version of conservative. And I tell them, I said, I am not who you think I am. You think that I am a conservative. But I said, I have had all kinds of politics in my life. I said I was involved in civil rights, for instance. I was a community organizer. I've helped to organize demonstrations, all right? And I said, I learned something from being a hippie, and I want to pass this on to you, and that is we need to start having public demonstrations in the faces of our enemies. Public demonstrations were awesomely powerful during the 60s and civil rights, and the reason was simple. The demonstrators held the high moral ground, and they could thrust this in a public way into the faces of their enemies. Now remember, we have to create a meeting place between us and the apologists for Islam, because we will never be invited, okay? We will never... I don't have people come to me in politics I do have actually people come to me in politics, so I'll skip that. But we need to be able to create a positive force for ourselves on our own terms. We have to push ourselves into the apologist space. So to do that, we need to make a public statement. And so I want to use demonstrations, and I want these demonstrations to be very videoable, video friendly. I want the demonstration to be done in silence. I want people to be wearing these gags that say voiceless on it. And I want it to be done in places of power. So that is one way we could deal with Family of Abraham events, for instance, is that we open the event by pushing brochures into their hands, and then when the people come out of the meeting, we want to have a demonstration there where people are holding up signs shaming them for neglecting the true victims in this world. But the real muscle comes from this idea. We need to be able to have a true offense so that we can pick specific targets and create pain, moral pain. Let me give you an example. In this town, the largest newspaper is the Tennessean. It's the largest newspaper in the state. They consistently write stories about the poor Muslims who have to live in such a racist, bigoted America. We're horrible people like myself. I have been crucified is a strong term, but I have been given hatchet jobs on the front page of the Tennessean 4 different times. They've spoken to me rather often. A friend of mine who works in public relations says, Bill, I've never seen a man who could get so much coverage in my life. And she says, you get it on the front page. How do you do that? They write columns about you? I says, since you've been in PR, my question to you is, how do I turn it off? So I want to be able to turn it on when I need to. So I want to be able to go to the Tennessean with what I call the committee. And the committee would say to the Tennessean, you know, in all your years, you only write about the poor Muslims. You never write about dead Christians. We want you to start writing about dead Christians, and we're going to be coming back in 4 weeks. So we come back in 4 weeks. They're not going to have done anything. They're not going to change policy because 3 people showed up. So then we say, okay, we're going to give you 4 more weeks, but now we're not asking, we're making a demand. Because in exactly 4 weeks, if we don't see a policy change in this newspaper, I'm going to turn up a few hundred people on the sidewalks outside your newspaper. We will issue a press release, and we're going to hold a demonstration, and we're going to say you are evil, that you're morally culpable in the death of Christians and Buddhists and Hindus around the world. See how you like that on the 6 o'clock news. So this technique can be used to project power and cause moral suffering in the apologists for Islam.
I think it's fantastic that Bill is an ex-hippie who has now come round a certain corner and seen some things for what they are. But when you look at the power that the 60s and 70s student movement had, it was phenomenal, and it really did change society. And I don't think it changed. They were moral
arguments.
Yep, absolutely. And if you can get the people behind you, and ideally if you can get the young people behind you, and I don't think that we oldies are going to actually do it on the streets. We can try to get the younger generations out on the streets, but the problem we have with the young, because these are the people who are historically the ones who go out and cause change and revolution, which is exactly what we need. But the trouble is, and it shouldn't be a problem, this only goes to show the power of the propaganda that's endemic across the Western world now. But young people are very pro-homosexual, they're very pro-equality, they're very pro-feminism, they're very pro-equal rights. And here they are, up against this most intransigent, monocultural, gay-hating, women-hating organization. So they should be thousands, hundreds of thousands of them on the street already. Why aren't they there? And what on earth can we do to overturn in decades of propaganda to make them see the reality of the situation? How do we do it?
Well, I want an opportunity to do it, I'll tell you that. I want to get in the same room with them. In talking about what I want to do, I am spinning castles in the air. That is, these are all plans that I'm talking to you about. However, I do have a foundation under me, and I do have allies in this city. And we have enough that we can certainly begin to pull some of these things off. But like I say, this my plan, A Voice for the Voiceless, comes after years of pushing forward fact-based arguments based on logic and knowledge. And it's just that we've made good inroads with that. But if we continue to do what we've been doing, we'll penetrate another 10% of society over the next 10 years, and that's not nearly fast enough. In America, what I see happening is that the advanced civil rights people, such as myself and yourself and Enza, we have to open up new fronts, because what we're doing is too slow. I have already started putting together a series of videos on this Voice for the Voiceless, and I said I have a criteria for it, and that is that a 14-year-old would be able to understand and execute everything we need to do. So I want something that's simple. That's one of the nice things about a demonstration, is that if you show up, you win. And that's the thing that I would like to start telling people here. We need to develop a technique so that when we show up, we win. But when we show up, it's got to be easy. For instance, I will show up and debate with anybody on the issue of Islam, but that is not a good basis for a political movement. That's kind of like I'm some black belt or something. We need something to do that anybody can do. And I think that's part of my structure of trying to create a voice for the voiceless. Because a 14-year-old can understand dead bodies. A 14-year-old can understand people who've been murdered, raped, kidnapped, tortured. They can understand that. They don't need to know the Hadith and the Sirah. So I want to put together a program that is based on simplicity and moral arguments, because both the Vietnam War and civil rights were done on the basis of moral arguments. And look at our hand. We have all the moral cards, okay? So we have something, we just need to use it. And it needs to be done in addition to the thought process. If we can ever get anybody to move onto the grounds of logic, we win. I wrote a book called Factual Persuasion, and it comes from the fact that I conducted a series of arguments and debates with progressives and leftists because my wife on 9/11 was a member of the film business and had worked in the music business before that. So almost all of the people we knew were liberals, Obama voters, Democrats. And yet, over a period of time, I persuaded each and every one that they may still vote for Obama, but they're not going to vote for Muhammad. But that is not a practical plan, because I had mastered Quran, Sirah, Hadith, and Sharia. Well, that means I'm a black belt. Well, we can't get 14-year-olds to be black belts in knowledge. Besides that, you can't tweet everything you need to know, so they're not going to know it. So anyway, we need things that are done that are simple, based on right and wrong. And we need to introduce shaming for those who do not do the right thing. And I think in particular in the religious world, this can work. Another aspect of A Voice for the Voiceless here in Nashville is this. We have many members of the immigrant persecuted church. We have Coptic Christians, we have Sudanese, we have Ethiopian, we have Nigerian, we have Iraq. So we have enough of the voiceless here. And the other thing I want to do in this Voice for the Voiceless campaign is to start a campaign to bring the persecuted church into the local church. That is, I want to convince, and the Coptic Christians are the only ones I've talked about this, but they're agreeable. I tell them, you need to put together a dog and pony show. I don't know if that translates for Enza or not. We need to put together an event so that we can bring you into churches and so that you can tell your story. So I want to bring about a fusion in Nashville between the persecuted church remnants and the established church. Because I think if we can start doing that, once people hear these stories, and also when they meet these people, the ones that I have met, who are from overseas, who are Nigerian and whatnot, and who are Christians, are wonderful people. They have, as a matter of fact, their religiosity, in a strange way, exceeds that of the natives. So once they can see how wonderful and beautiful these people are, as their character and their nature, I think that we can get more people who are willing to say, people like this should not be harmed, and as a result, the minister who has these people come to his church will not attend the next Family of Abraham dialogue. So that's another aspect I want to do in this Voice of the Voiceless, is to bring those who have not been heard into churches so that people can hear their voice. So, as you can tell, I have big plans.
Yeah.
But I figure you get big results only from big plans. Also, the idea is this. Succeed or fail. Sometimes we get ideas and we realize if we do not do them, we will regret it on our deathbed. And I've structured my entire life so that when I lay down to die, I don't have regrets about, oh, I wish I had done this. So this falls under the heading of, once I've had this idea, I no longer have a choice on whether to execute it or not. I can't live with myself if I do not. So there's a lot of problems, but that's okay. I'm going to push ahead.
Bill, I just want to say we're coming down to the last 5 minutes or so of the show. I think our listeners have really enjoyed it immensely. The chat room has been buzzing here while you've been talking, and we'd certainly like you to come back again at some point in the future and elaborate a little bit more about your project and the ideas that you have.
Okay.
Would you be agreeable to doing that for us sometime in the future?
Let me introduce you to my marketing plan. My marketing plan has 2 steps. I never solicit business. I never refuse a call.
Okay, well that's great. Would you like to give us a few closing thoughts, please?
Well, what I've described for you works with groups, okay? But I would also tell you this: if as an individual, let's say you're a Christian. Could you not work this on a smaller individual plan? That is, to talk to your own minister about where is our moral voice on this idea of suffering brothers and sisters? That is, although I've just done this in terms of groups, there as individuals we can do things. If, for instance, here's an example. We're bringing into Nashville a Pakistani Christian who had acid thrown in her face. So we're bringing one person. So we're not able to bring together all the persecuted church, but we are bringing in one person. And she's going to speak at one church. So what I'm saying here is, and she's going to be on a radio show, so even before we get to the power of mass, it is possible to take this idea, to stand up for those who are victims and martyrs, that we stand up for them. Even as individuals, we can do one thing or t'other, and we don't have to wait until the fact that we can get, say, 200 people. Because as individuals, we can press the moral arguments that, like I say, and switch from factual arguments to moral arguments, ethical arguments, and basically just do the right thing. Come on. So everything that I've said here, and I notice on the intro to the show, A Voice for the Voiceless website is there. You can see the first copy of the brochure. And by the way, that website is not at all developed. I just went out and bought the name, and it's just the brochures on it to park it. But nevertheless, there are things that we can do as individuals to press moral arguments. And I guess that would be what I would conclude. If you don't have a group, do it by yourself.
I hope very much to be able to speak to you again soon, Bill. And
thank you so much for what you're doing.
Once more
thank
for
you,
calling in.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bill. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, team.
Goodbye.
Bye.